Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to the Baal Shalom's Matan Torah with commentary by Rabbi Abraham Mordechai Gottlieb. We are in the first essay of Giving, a time to act, the Baal Shalom's mission statement as to why he decided to begin disseminating the wisdom of Kabbalah, of course, as well with reshut, from permission from heaven, so to speak. But we'll get into that as time continues. Last time we spoke about particularly how the dissemination of falsehood and nonsense by way of inauthentic authors was amongst the main intentions and reasons for the Baal Sulam to combat and bring his authentic Kabbalah to the masses, as there needed to be a great light to battle the great darkness of the time, and arguably even more so today. Just going to open up the live stream here in case there's any viewers and listeners with questions. There we go. So we are towards the top of page 33. The Baal Sulam continues. However, now that there are printing presses everywhere and authors have no need of copyists and the high price of books have been reduced, the way has been paved for irresponsible authors also to produce whatever books they fancy for whatever motive, be it for money, for honor, or the like. They do not stop to consider the nature of their work nor even glance at its consequences. The Rebbe Shlita says on this, since these irresponsible authors do everything only to fulfill their selfish desires, naturally they are not interested in the consequences of their actions or the authenticity of their deeds. For them, the end justifies the means, and the end for them is just to fulfill their desire to receive for themselves alone. The Baal Sulam continues, and from the time such books began to multiply, their authors, without any learning or personal instruction, literally receiving mouth to mouth, from a qualified rabbi, and even without any knowledge of those ancient texts that have connection to matters of this sort, put together ideas from themselves alone, or from all kinds of nonsense. They, the irresponsible authors, then claim that their words are derived from exalted matters, by which can be depicted the soul of the nation and its grand treasure. And like fools, they do not know to exercise caution. Indeed, they have no way of knowing that they've bequeathed distorted ideas for generations to come. In exchange for this satisfaction of their minuscule desires, these authors are sinning and leading astray the masses for generations. It's important to note that sinning, by the language of the Baal Sulam, is a matter of dissimilarity of form. If one sins, they're instantly disconnected from the Creator. It's also important to note that the Baal Sulam says that the sin itself is the punishment, because veering away from the Creator is itself a punishment by not being connected to Him. The punishment, seemingly, of the pain and suffering that comes after the fact is already considered tikkunim, which is great for us and for all of humanity. So, again, the notion of sinning is a misalignment from similarity of form, which is giving. Generally speaking, a sin is receiving for oneself alone. Obviously, that can manifest in many different parameters as it pertains to Torah mitzvot and the halacha, but that's a separate conversation. Let's read again from the top, just so we can plug in the Rebbe's commentary. And from this time, such books began to multiply, their authors, without any learning or personal instruction, literally receiving mouth to mouth from a qualified rabbi. Let's see the Rebbe Shita on this. He says on the comment, receiving mouth to mouth. This needs to be understood. What is the concept of mouth to mouth? For surely it would seem that the transmission of wisdom should be from mouth to ear. The source of this is in Numbers, or Bamidbar, 12, 7, and 8. Quote, "Not so my servant Moshe. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly and not in riddles. And he beholds the form of God." The holy Or HaChaim, otherwise Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, explains that the spiritual and material are two complete opposites. For the one is characterized by giving and perfection, and the other by receiving and lack. If a prophet is not prepared for both these opposites, the prophet can go insane. In this case, there's a difference between something coming from the mouth of God and something coming from the mouth of the prophet, who is still influenced by the material world. This was not so in the case of Moshe, who was extremely refined and whose physical form was equal to his spiritual form. Thus, there was no gap between an idea coming from God's mouth and an idea coming from Moshe's mouth, so that his speech was truly equal to God's speech, because he was so bitul, so nullified, so humble, that he was 100% vessel for the message of the Creator, in contrast to other prophets who may have been 50%, 90%, 10%. But either way, there was a mixing with the ways of the world, or just not that level of refinement. But Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, being the greatest of all time in regards to the prophets, was 100%, and therefore was given mouth to mouth, as said here. And that is the intention behind mouth to mouth, says the Rebbe Shita. That is, that there was no gap between his mouth and the other, being the mouth of the transmitter of wisdom and the mouth of the receiver. Now, I think it's important to look at the big picture in regards to this notion of receiving mouth to mouth, being that receiving mouth to mouth assumes, considering it also says right after that, from a qualified rabbi, meaning that we're receiving mouth to mouth from a qualified rabbi, ideally, is that this qualified rabbi himself received mouth to mouth, which means the qualified rabbi refined himself to the degree that he was able to nullify himself and therefore receive the utmost from his rabbi, who was able to nullify himself to the utmost to receive from his rabbi, so on and so forth, back to Moshe Rabbeinu, who was able to nullify himself completely in order to receive the direct word of the Creator. This is in contrast to teachers who, let's say, for example, in this generation, may receive plenty of information, but it might be more akin to mouth to ear, meaning they take in the information and relay it in their own form, but they're not necessarily following in the tradition and way of nullifying themselves, becoming bitul, and then receiving the information in such a way, because in truth it's more than information when one has this type of relationship with the rabbi. When one nullifies themselves to that degree, there is much more going on in terms of the soul's connection to each other. And the student can receive much more in such a fashion. But if the rabbi can do this, meaning be humble enough and refine themselves enough to properly receive from their rabbi, then that's a good qualification in terms of choosing for oneself a master to nullify oneself to. So it's important to note that in the introduction to the Zohar, the Baal Shalom says that if one learns all of the revealed sections of the Torah, being the Talmud and its commentaries, as well as the laws in its commentaries, the halacha, but doesn't connect or learn the inner matters of the Torah, that individual is at the level of domem b'kedusha. They're at the holy inanimate level. And there's different parameters of our spiritual work being inanimate, plant, animal, speaking, and godly, which is the Yehudi, the Yisrael, the Jew. As the speaking pertains to generally desiring wisdom for wisdom's sake, whereas the Jew is at a higher level of development because the Jew desires to give, to be altruistic, and connect to the Creator, which is not necessarily the case if we take a look at the history of humanity as far as the speaking level is concerned, in contrast to the Yisrael, which is Yashar Kel, straight to God, pure intention. This is not to belittle, God forbid, the amazing scholars of the Torah who have absorbed such levels of Torah wisdom and knowledge and are able to relay with great efficiency information from the Talmud and Halacha. Because the truth is, even those individuals who are at domem b'kedusha, which is the first level on the spiritual ladder, that first level is still greater, as bitter as it is, than the majority of the people of the world. Some people are not even in the game, so to speak. They're not on the ladder. But this is also meaning to inspire us to see the greatness and importance of the inner matters of the Torah, and to what degree they can bring us to higher levels of refinement and therefore closeness to the Creator. The reason I'm bringing this is because the culture of today's Torah society is, by large and part, the revealed matters of the Torah. So to choose for oneself a rabbi who received mouth to mouth, but is only involved in relaying the revealed matters of the Torah, is logically not as efficient of a choice for one's own spiritual development to connect to and nullify oneself to, if there is an option otherwise to choose a spiritual master who is more balanced in their approach and has both soul, more importantly, and body of the Torah. Again, and from the time such books began to multiply, their authors, without any learning or personal instruction, literally receiving from mouth to mouth from a qualified rabbi. The Rabbi Shita says, a qualified rabbi. For a qualified rabbi, we find two definitions. A, if the rabbi is similar to an angel of the Lord of hosts, then seek to learn Torah from his mouth. As quoted from Moed Katan 17a, an angel of the Lord of hosts is from the prophet Malachi Navi, which in English is pronounced Malachi. That is, if the rabbi's effort is to be giving and he doesn't want to receive in any way. Meaning, an angel, as described in holy books, is akin to a spiritual animal. Why? An animal operates based on instinct. So to an angel, says the Bala Sulam, are kochot of the nefesh. Angels are nothing more than mechanisms of the soul of man. Angels are, in essence, mechanisms of the Creator that are revealed within an individual's soul to assist them in their spiritual work. In truth, there is also spiritual works that speak about damaging angels, meaning kochos of the nefesh, strengths or powers of the soul that have a negative influence, that veer us away from the Creator. Regardless, there are mechanisms that are operating based on instinct because they just have a purpose. And the purpose of an angel is to serve the Creator based on its program. And that program is to be 100% giving to the Creator because that's what it's built to do. That's its programming. So if the qualified rabbi is so refined that their actions are akin to instinct in that they're already on such a high level that instinctually they're only giving and don't wish to receive, then that's a good parameter to choose for oneself, a master. And the second one, if he can clearly explain, even partially, the hidden secrets and underlying purposes of Torah in a manner that is uplifting and inspires people to serve God. The Baal HaSulam says in one of his essays that the greatest prophets are ones who can relay their information and wisdom to the lowest individuals. Meaning greatness is based on the ability to uplift even the lowest individuals, particularly them, ideally. This means to say that a lesser prophet, meaning someone who only is experiencing personal prophecy, in contrast to the great prophets that are in the canon of Tanakh, being Yechezkel, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, and so forth. If this lesser prophet is able to relay the information that they receive from the Creator in order to uplift and inspire people who are far from the Creator and far from Torah and Mitzvot, then that prophet is greater and more successful than the great prophets who may not have had such a positive influence. I bring this in order to paint the picture of the greatness of the qualified rabbi. So too, the same way the greatness of the prophet is based on the ability to relay the information to the lowest of people, so too the qualified rabbi should be based on their ability to inspire and uplift even the lowest of individuals who are furthest from the Torah and the mitzvot. God willing, we should all be able to connect to such qualified rabbis, qualified spiritual masters. The Rebbe Shita says that one should ideally choose for themselves a spiritual master who has filled all levels of their soul and completed their tikkun, meaning nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida, the 5 levels of the soul, meaning completed all of them. He also says in the same comment that if we were to hold to such a standard, no one would teach and no one would choose for themselves a rabbi. Because let's be real, there is such a thing called Yeridot Hadorot. There's a dissension of the generation, meaning we are lower than the generations prior, which also means we have greater potential because we're more coarse, but that's a side note. So because we're lower, generally speaking, that means that there's not as many tzaddikim and refined people at such high levels of fully being corrected. So he says, at the very least, someone should choose someone that is at least trying to attain the truth. Someone who is aware of the notion of the vekus and spiritual refinement and is trying with their utmost to reach these high spiritual levels and has at least made significant movement in this work. That is someone we should connect to add to this qualified rabbi parameter, which in essence is connecting to the notion of being giving and not trying to receive in any way, which assumes that level of refinement. So again, God willing, we should be able to all connect to such amazing individuals. They are out there, and if one is lacking one and desires one, then it's good to request and to pray and to speak to the Creator to provide the opportunities or to manifest such a means to connect to the spiritual masters. Because by way of connecting to those connected to the Creator, we connect to the Creator.